Hey there, this is Dan, and you're watching The Salty Sea. And I am doing this episode on the cheap little bastards that you put in your Warcry warbands because one of the things I noticed when I was going over my tier lists for both budget and competitive is a few people complained to me that when I said Warcry is actually incredibly well balanced game, right? You toss out, yeah, there's one warband that's head and shoulders above the rest, and there are four that kind of really struggle to put together a competitive list, but by and large, the rest of them all pretty much function on roughly the same competitive level. Um, a lot of people reached out and said, "Well, yes, the external balance of all of these factions is really good, but the internal balance is off in the exact same way for every faction." And it's very true, right? When you look at my starter list videos, all the competitive lists, I'm going straight to spamming as many of the chaff units as you possibly can. Um, so I want to talk about this because, there were people who were really upset about that, feeling like to be competitive, they're sort of forced into the same kind of thing each time. And I want to just show that there are ways to play the game where that doesn't have to be true. And I am, however, going to start with just some kind of basic principles for people who aren't uh, at that point yet, just so they understand what I'm talking about and what the strengths are, right? So first of all, what are chaff models? How am I talking about this, right? They're sort of cheap units that can form the backbone of your warband that you can put a lot of on the tabletop. And it really depends faction to faction. Right, so sometimes your chaff is just the cheapest unit your faction has to offer. Sometimes that's not even very cheap, right? Like Stormcast, two of the Stormcast warbands, the cheapest thing they can do is put Griffhounds into play, right? And those are still 150 points each. Or, for example, Slanesh, um, their Demonettes are really great on the demon side, but on the mortal side, Blissbarb Archers are their cheapest choice for 80 points, and a lot of Slanesh mortal players are just really dissatisfied with what the archers managed to do. Um, Other times you have real choices with your chaff units, right? Skaven get to pick and choose between a whole bunch. Sylvaneth have three really functional ones. And, a lot of the time also just factions with solid chaff options, they just get to approach list building in a completely different way. And, factions with just one chaff unit, they really are, if you're trying to sort of make a more competitive, more functional warband, um, you're really looking at that one unit as the backbone of every warband you make, which, I know some people feel a little chafed by that chaff situation, but, you know, I personally don't mind it. I like having, my Blood Reavers, my Revenants, but not everyone loves it. So let's talk about kind of why it is, right? What are the benefits of chaff no matter what kind of mission you're in? And then we can talk about, later when that doesn't matter. So the first is having activations. This is a game, every fighter gets two activations kind of regardless. So elite fighters don't get that advantage over the cheap ones. Um, Having more, you know, people on the battlefield just means you get to do more things. Yes, the most elite units have the highest impact activations, and that's really important when you're using abilities, right? So there's this way that the game mechanics sort of ask you to stratify to just put your heaviest hitters on the board to use up, be the best targets for your abilities, and then have as many cheap units as you possibly can just to have more things to do. Um, it's also just easier to list build when you have a lot of chaff, right? It's easier to get the pieces you want into a list if you have smaller building blocks to work with, right? You get more decision points when you're, using these 50-point plague bearers than you do when, say, the other half of Nurgle, when, your cheapest unit is 135 points and you have to try to do math somehow to make a reasonable list work, and it's just much harder. It takes a ton more work to write, worse lists than you would get when you have cheaper guys to fit into different slots. Um, Another one is just patience, right? So, like I said before, the game mechanics asking for heavy hitters plus chaff. Um, the more models you have, the more you can kind of wait and see how the board is developing before you commit your most important pieces, right? You really don't want to sort of throw out your most important piece early just to watch the board, you know, 5, 6, 7 activations later be totally different than it was before. And now you realize that you've actually committed in the wrong spot, or maybe it gets killed, something like that. Um, One cool thing that Games Workshop has done is with some certain control abilities that actually make you want to commit your most important piece first. I'm thinking about the Bloodrack Medusa or the Contorted Epitome. A lot of people complain about the Epitome being kind of oppressive, but I do think it's playing in really interesting sort of game mechanic space because of the way it asks you to commit early. Um, but for the most part, you want to be committing your sort of most important big pieces much later, and you want to sort of use chaff to wait out your opponent to force them to act and commit before you have to. Um, the other benefit is overkill. So just straight up, the math, 3 hit point fighters take more damage to kill than one 30 hit point fighter, right? Because if you know, deal 8 wounds to that 10 HP fighter, and then you have to fight it again and you deal 6, right? You dealt 16 damage to just take out that one 10-point guy, right? Whereas if you were going up against a 30 hit point guy, you're halfway there. So, um, when they're sort of pointing these things and you can get 3 hit point fighters for the same price as one 30 hit point fighter, um, you're actually getting a much tankier, much more survivable crew when you've got these cheaper fighters than you are when you have the more expensive one. So that can be a really big um, deal when it comes to chaff, and something always to keep in mind when you're thinking about survivability with your warband. This is one reason why some people just really value damage being the most, because it's like you want damage and then numbers, because numbers are your toughness more than you know a few big beefy guys do. Um, the missions do a really good job, in my opinion, actually counteracting that sometimes. But you know, the basic building blocks of this are still part of the game right here. Um, there are also, specific scenarios that just really favor the warband with more numbers. So there are 18 sort of matched play victory conditions in the base game. 12 of them really favor the team with the numbers advantage. These are going to be any objective mission, because on objectives, basically having more dudes wins, right? And any area control mission is also going to be really important for this, because it's usually just like having the most people in a certain area of the board, and it doesn't matter who's the strongest people in that board. It's just what you've got for numbers. So all of those missions just really favor the high numbers warband, but then some of the hunter ones do too. So, for example, if it's, say, blood marked, which is the one where you pick a really valuable fighter, you take it out, um, and you keep them from taking yours out. Um, that one, it doesn't really matter how many numbers you have. It's more about power projection. It's more about sort of getting onto their fighter while maybe being able to body block for your own. Um, that one, chaff isn't that important. But let's say you go to the one where it's you have to destroy your opponent's hammer, right? Now, a lot of cheap or sorry, like low model count warbands, they only have one unit in their hammer, because that's the one that's least likely to end up on the board right away, etc. So if there's only one, it's often going to be fairly trivial for your opponent to try to take it out, even if it's a fairly tough unit, which it usually won't be if you're in a low model count warband. However, if you're on like a 12, 13 model warband, all of those sort of one battle group kill missions, they favor the warband with more people because you can scatter, right? You can all just run in different directions because those missions, they're actually my favorite in the game for the most part, but they often go by um, your, your target guys are just kind of running away and playing keep away, while your other two battle groups are just doing their best to track down the uh, the target deployment group for your other crew. And then also fights happen in between with body blocking. But the more you have in your target battle group, the more directions they have to go if you all just run around, in different parts of the board. So having more numbers there really matters for about half of the hunter missions. There's only one mission in there that actually actively punishes having lots of cheap models. So that's why when you look at my tier list, when you look at how I've built those warbands, and how I've sort of with the math hammer rubric really valued having a ton of models in your warband really highly, this is the reason why, right? Because yes, there are all of these benefits to having a lot of models just in a basic, you know, sort of in a vacuum without the missions, but even the missions themselves generally favor the team with more numbers. Um, Same is true with the, quote unquote narrative victory conditions, the ones where one warband is naturally favored against the other. 14 of those heavily favor the warband with the numbers advantage. 4 don't. So, that's a pretty big deal when you're just picking randomly, or if you're in sort of a tournament setting and your TO is kind of trying to pick a representative sampling. The same is true again in Catacombs, but less so. Catacombs has 6 match play and 6 kind of narrative missions. Half of them heavily favor the numbers advantaged warband, but 2 it doesn't matter, and 1 for both matched and for narrative makes Chaff a real liability. So it's not like Chaff always wins every time, and that's one of the things that I want to get to here. Another thing that matters a lot in Catacombs is the deployments. The way that the warbands get deployed really affects where the fights end up on that map, right? Because that map has no terrain in the middle, but a ton of really dense terrain on around the sides. So some deployments will create these kind of trench warfares situations on the sides of the map, and some will create these big central punch-ups. Um, and the central punch-ups vastly favor the high chaff warbands, but the more like trenchy corridor battles actually favor the elite warbands quite a bit. So your deployment really matters if you end up in Catacombs. But let's talk about, if if you're out there and you're not happy with just being pushed into having really high model count, spamming lots of cheap units, what can you do, right? And I actually think that there's, a decent amount that you can do. First of all, I just want to talk about 2 missions where um, having lots of cheap models is actually an active liability. So in the core game, the No Mercy victory condition, um, you win by taking out half of your opponent's warband. This is just by numbers, right? So it seems at first, and there is a little bit of this, where if your opponent has, say, 13 models, right, which is a lot in this game. You have to kill 7 of them. That's a really daunting task at first. Um, but you can target the cheapest, wimpiest models, right? So in terms of points cost, let's say they've spammed a ton of their chaff models and just have a couple elites and that's it. Um, if you can take cheap chaff models out efficiently, if you've built your warband to be able to do that, um, the high chaff warband just has no chance here, right? Because you can basically just kill 300 points of models and get credit for killing more than half of their warband, where they might have to take out 550, 600 of your points to do the same thing. So that can be a huge advantage for you if you don't have the numbers advantage in the game. Um, Catacombs has a really interesting battle called Running Battle, um, where it's for each round, the wounds characteristic that you've killed, you just add it up, and whoever has the most um, wins. And that really favors the warband that can manipulate how many things they kill when. So it really favors having high damage, which, that's fine. And it really favors kind of mobility and being able to pick your fights. Um, However, it can be really difficult for the high chaff warband because a lot of the times you'll find when you're the numbers warband against the elite one, you start off, throwing away a bunch of your models to weaken their guys. Then you take out a few of their guys in a wave, and then you win on objectives. Um, However, in this kind of battle, they if you take them all out at once, you only get 1 point for that. So then they're going to beat you 4-1. Um, So you have to really change that. There becomes pressure to actually leave one elite alive if you've killed one. And then if you do that, of course, it gets to then kill more chaff. And then sometimes you'll even get to where you took one out, but because you are kind of under pressure to leave one alive, they are in a situation where they might even be able to reverse it in that round and completely blow you out. So really favors the elite warband in running battle. One thing to note that I forgot about No Mercy is it actually doesn't favor all elite warbands, just because if you just get unlucky and lose two of your models, you can just straight up lose the the whole round, right, off of just like two bad rolls. It favors more like think about Iron Jaws, where they're putting together seven models, or some of those who are just doing like seven, eight, nine in terms of their numbers. Those are the kinds of war bands, those kind of mid-range war bands that are really favored in No Mercy. Um, there's also though the fact that a lot of missions that don't favor chaff or that punish chaff, they really heavily favor mobility or range. So, for example, the treasure missions, they don't really favor chaff models at all. You know, Chaff models don't really matter at all in the treasure missions. However, you know, what they really favor is having move 10 flyers. Um, so some of the slow elite war bands, so think Nurgle Rotbringers, um, you know, certain Stormcast, although this is less of an issue now with some of the new stuff from the Grand Alliance books. Some of the slower elite warbands, they really struggle to find a victory condition that really benefits them, right? So even the 6-inch flying move on the rot flies for Nurgle can be, not that much in the scheme of things when a lot of other warbands are putting 10-inch move flyers out there. So that can just be something to think about when you're kind of trying to build your elite warband and build games that don't favor chaff. Um, but the reason I wanted to bring these two battles up specifically, although there are others, is because if you are feeling pressure from the game to have to build your warband a certain way, you don't have to just pick random battles. You can talk with your opponents. If you feel like range is too powerful, you can just host the game and all of a sudden your terrain board or your board just has a ton of terrain on it, and then range is going to be a lot less of a problem there. You can say ahead of time like, hey, I really want to play on this mission. You can do things like this, and No Mercy and Running Battle are both kind of quote unquote match play missions, right? So they are fair. They don't necessarily they don't purposefully weight the board one way or the other. They just sort of punish certain types of list building the same as every single other mission does, right? So they just happen to punish list building in a very different way than most of the missions do. So these are things that you can do to make really interesting changes to your games that can be really good for you if you're feeling sort of pressurized one way. I also want to talk about just counteracting chaff heavy warbands. Oh, and by the way, before I get into that, for the games that don't favor it, I am going to be, I highlighted these two. I am going to be tweeting out just a quick spreadsheet I did of all the above ground match play missions, which ones favor chaff and which ones don't. So I'll just tweet out a little picture of my spreadsheet for that. Just real quick. Yes, I decided to add a Twitter account to this channel. No, I don't know why. Yes, it was a bad idea. We'll see how it goes. All right. So, um, the most important thing for list building for yourself, if you want to be sort of favored against these high chaff warbands, or if you want to be able to fight them, is having ways to kill them really efficiently. So one of them is sort of mobile units that can take them out in one shot. Because you want to be using as few activations as possible to even the numbers for your team, right? So if you have someone who can just move on to a chaff unit and kill it right away, maybe even before it's acted, you're immediately robbing them of two activations. Then if they come back onto you with more chaff models and they don't kill you, then you can just right away just kill two of them um, again on the next round. So that can be a way that sort of big certain elite units can make up their points is if you kill a chaff unit every single round and you're moving around the board, potentially, in certain missions, like moving to places that matter as you kill chaff, so move on to an objective and then kill a chaff unit that was helping hold it. Um, that can be something that allows your elite units to make up their points. So something like the Prosecutor with Grand Blade actually has an 88% chance of killing a toughness 3 8 HP fighter in just one attack, right? So it can, because you get two chances in your activation, it can, move and kill in one thing. There's a bunch that have a 66% chance. So like the Gorehound, the Squake Boss, the Crypt Infernal, they all have a 66% chance of doing it. And that goes up through the roof if they're using Onslaught, by the way. Wrathmasters, they're kind of slower. They only move 4 inches, but they have an 81% chance to take out chaff. And then they also have this, because they have range 2, you can sort of run them forward to an area that really matters on the board and put this big kill zone so that in all future rounds, you're threatening to kill 2 chaff units a turn. With your Wrathmaster. Kurnoth Hunters are like that too. Any 2-inch, I think it's the like Lord of Pain is like that too. Any 2-inch range model um, that can one-shot kill a chaff unit is really valuable for being able to do that. You also have a few ranged units that really mow down chaff. So, for example, out of Stormcast Vanguard, you've got the Hurricane Raptor. I think the best of them is probably the Thunder Fist because it has a 49% chance from 10-inch range to one-shot kill a chaff unit. And this is from range, so it doesn't even have to move, so it can do that twice. Um, and then a 94% chance of doing it in 2 tries. And then it has that bonus ability too, where on a triple, it might be a double, you can shoot, and then if you kill something, you get a bonus shot. So you can actually sometimes take out 3 chaff models in one activation using a Thunder Fist. It makes Ogre Maw Tries an incredible sort of anti-meta pick. And it's just a great way to fight the chaff metagame. Another thing that can be somewhat useful, depending on what unit it is on, is ranged burn spells. I generally hate them because the amount of damage that you get for the dice that you spend is almost always really bad. But it is really useful when picking off models that just have 1 or 2 wounds left. That's something that you will experience a lot of if you have a more mid-range warband, right? You don't have some of these super elite chaff killers, but you do just have these 180 to 200 point models sort of peppering your warband. Some of these ranged burn spells are going to be really good when they leave a model on 1 point of toughness left. For example, evocators have this. Or yeah, you've left this model with 1 or 2 toughness left. I'm just going to spend a double or a triple to just finish it off. Cursed Darts from the K-Knight Shadow Stalkers is really good for that if you play that warband. So there are things you can do for building your list to sort of counteract if you know that your opponent is going to be bringing a ton of numbers. And, I just think it's really important to let everyone know. So all this is just to say, yes, the little bastards somewhat rule Warcry, but if you don't like that, it's okay because there are things you can do. There are games you can play that won't benefit the chaff, the high numbers warbands. There are ways you can punish them. Um, you don't have to just be held hostage by this particular, quote unquote meta, right? So I hope that that's really useful to you. I hope if you um, don't love being forced into playing lots of little cheap guys, I hope that you've sort of found some sort of new hope. And if you do love the cheap guys, I hope that you at least take this as like your warning that they won't always be kings of the roof in every or roost in every single game, whatever that metaphor is supposed to be. Um, so thanks a bunch for watching. If this has been useful to you at all, please put down a like down below. It does help sort of boost the signal on these videos so that more people see them, so more people discover Warcry, which is an awesome game, and would love to have more people playing it. I'll be back with more Warcry videos in the future. Um, I think, like I said last video, my frequency of posting is going to be a little bit less in the summer here, but uh, we'll certainly pick up more frequent in the fall. And, I'm still playing games, still really into the game. So, um, thanks, and until next time, may all your rolls be crits.